The last time we had taken the hadith about the companions asking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement about in tukhfu ma fi anfusikum aw tubduhu yuhasibukum Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that whatever you hide in your chest or whatever you make apparent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes you to account for that. So what happened then? The companions, they were shocked. They were worried. They're like, well, okay, wait a minute. What? And what did they say to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? They asked for an explanation, but before they asked for the explanation, what did they say? Okay. First, they listed what all the things that they could do. They said, "Hey, listen, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala asked us to pray, we prayed. He asked us to fast, we fasted. He asked us to give zakat, all of the other things. We were able to do those things. But now, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, He's asking us to do too much. Why? Why did that happen? And what did we say about the ayah? Did we say that is the ayah one of those that where we do we say that was abrogated? Did the ruling change? No, the ruling didn't change. So what was the issue, or what was the problem, or what was the mistake that the companions made? They took the literal meaning of the ayah, right? They took the literal apparent meaning of the verse and they misunderstood it. And they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they complained about it. So here, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what was the response that he gave them? To make istighfar. Ahsanti, good. He told them, he said, make istighfar. Why did he tell them to do that? Sure. So what was wrong with the reaction? Excellent. So basically, the Prophet ﷺ is reminding them and saying that, okay, why would you even think like that about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is it meaning in kind of putting them, giving them perspective, conceptually, is it possible that Allah would have you do something or obligate you to do something that you don't have the ability to do? No. And not just that, they themselves, how did they start the conversation? They started listing all the things that they could do. So he's basically reminding them and telling them, like, listen, why would you think such of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And I think this is it's a very good perspective for us to also have when we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the sense that Allah Azza wa Jal, he's not petty. Right? He's not waiting for us to make mistakes. He's not waiting for us to fall into sin. He's not waiting for us to forget something, right? He Azza wa Jal, he's above and beyond that. And if we actually think about what a divine characteristic is, it's really amazing when we look at the characteristic of rahmah, when we look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's infinite mercy. Because part of his infinite mercy is looking at us how? In the moment or as a whole? As a whole. He Azza wa Jal, not just that, he gives us opportunities, and there will be more hadith inshallah that are coming in the same series of a hadith that talk about that Allah Azza wa Jal will always look at us as a whole. He's never going to look at us in a particular or a specific instance, because that doesn't define who we are. And he Azza wa Jal, he says in other verses, in the hasanat yudhibna sayyat, right, like good deeds wipe away bad deeds. And this is very different from how we as humans, unfortunately, we interact and we deal with each other. Um, so and even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I always found it amazing, how he sallallahu alaihi wasallam frames certain things when he says something like man la yashkurun nas la yashkurullah, the one who does not thank the people is not thankful to Allah. And I was like, wow, if how can I be thankful of someone? Number one, I have to, if we actively think about it, I actually have to remember the things that other people do for me, right? Like, and that requires a certain type of mindset. If I keep looking at the negatives of the people around me, and I keep saying, oh, this person didn't do this, and that person didn't do that, and this person didn't say this to me, how could this person do that to me? What happens internally? Right? I'm sorry? Right? It just causes this feeling of anxiety and being overwhelmed and constantly being stressed. Because what have I done? I've created a toxic personality within myself, right? And I'm just a very toxic person, and because the only thing I can see is what? Negative. That's all I can see. But if I start looking at people, it's like somebody says something mean to me, or somebody says something bad to me, And I look back and I was like, man, but he gave me a ride, you know, like 3 times to the station when I needed it. Or this person, he did this to me. It's like, man, but like there's so many times that he made dua for me. Or this person did this to me. It's like, man, but I remember when she brought food. And the thing is, this allows us to kind of take a step back and remember and look at those around us as a whole, like as a human being, because in the instance, and many of us have suffered from this. What happens in an instance or in a moment? Are we always like cool and composed? Like we got everything figured out? I'm sorry. It could be a passing thought. So which relates directly back to this hadith of discussion that we have, right? There can always be that moment of where I'm not making the correct decision, or I'm not making the most informed decision, or I'm not saying that or speaking in the best way. And many times, like, because I'm cranky, right? You know what I mean? Like, right, I didn't have my coffee, or I'm hungry, or I'm sleepy, and we come up with all of these excuses, right? We come up with all of these excuses, and and it's amazing, and I think we had pointed this out before. We never have the same excuse from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Like he's never like, oh no, I'm not, I'm still tired. 8. I have class until 9. I have another class after this. If they want to come after that, mumkin. Huh? Are you, but I need someone to do the certificate. Huh? خلاص يعني استفسر اسأل. Ask if they don't need it يعني they can come to me after class. Huh? Yeah, like have them come at like 8:30, 8:45. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's never a hadith where he's like, oh, can't you see I'm not feeling well? Or like, but this is the expectation we have from others, right? When someone's like, can I ask you a question, man, bro? Like I haven't eaten all day, I have a headache, right? And this is the excuses that we have. Those excuses aren't wrong. Like please don't don't misunderstand. Those excuses are completely reasonable because we have to be aware of how we are in the situations that we're in. And sometimes when somebody asks us or approaches us, we don't want to be dismissive, and we actually want to engage that person. So if someone comes to me and is like, hey, listen, I need help with this, and I'll be like, hey, listen, right now I can't, just give me a couple hours, I have a headache, or there's something that's going on with me. Having that honesty is something that's definitely really important. Saying that, we don't have this just shows the emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ, like where he's always able to keep that perspective in line. And you actually have a very famous hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, where he used to write down the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and then the companions were like, the Prophet sometimes he's angry, sometimes he's happy, like don't write down everything he says. The Prophet actually noticed, and he's like, Manak. He's like, well, what happened? I used to see you writing down everything, and then you stopped. He was like, well, the other companions, they told me X, Y, Z. And he said, ما يخرج من هذا الفي إلا الحق. He said, nothing comes out of this mouth except the truth. So that's how he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and may Allah give us, like, just a little bit of that emotional intelligence, a little of that sabr, so that we learn how to, sideline certain opinions, certain feelings that we have. In many times we'll have feelings about people, and it might be the first time that we met that person. It's just like we just have a feeling of maybe like strong dislike towards someone, or we might have like someone. We should never let those feelings interfere with how we deal with individuals. Like those first knee-jerk reactions are always not the healthy way to frame the discussions that we have with each other and how we're dealing with each other. We talked about, so the verse here. What did we say that the verse meant? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he says that you're held accountable for what is in your chest or what is in your hearts, what does that mean? Okay, there are different types of thoughts for sure. So what thoughts are we held accountable for, and what thoughts are we not held accountable for? Okay, so if I make intention to do something, then I'm held accountable there. Like that? Okay, so that we call this azam, right? So when an individual has full intention to fulfill something, then that niyyah is where he is held accountable. And then when he actually fulfills it, then it's written as a sayyah. But this is how the scholars understood it, inshallah. But there are more hadith, inshallah, that we're going to cover and that we're going to talk about that actually explains this concept a little bit more. It is never too early to ask a question, but it might be too early to answer it, right? Of course. So. Hmm. Yeah, sure. So trauma is a little bit of a different situation. If an individual has trauma, and in saying that, having good thoughts for people are for people who deserve those good thoughts. Does that make sense? Right. So if a person hurt you and that person shows zero remorse, is that person deserving of my good thoughts? It depends on what. Right. I don't have to forgive that person, but it's not about we're not at forgiveness yet. We're still at the point of having good thoughts toward others. Because deserving means that I'm actually making an investment in that individual. Does that make sense? Right. The moment somebody hurts me, or continuously hurts me, or is abusive, and I make it very clear to this person, like, hey, listen, you hurt me, and they're like, yeah, whatever. They're like, oh no, he just had a bad year. Right. No, that's not. I don't feel that's deserving. But a person, they might, in situations are always going to vary, right? A person might take advantage, then they apologize, they retract, they stop, and then they take advantage again, right? And then you might see a repeated pattern with someone. Maybe they don't have the ability to maintain. Maybe they haven't set their boundaries properly. Maybe they haven't avoided those situations where it's very easy for them to fall into and take advantage or hurt others. So it really depends, and it is very much a case by case. But in general, I will say that an individual who doesn't show remorse, and remorse is a tough one too, because is it necessary that a person who takes advantage of me or hurts me, that they apologize in a way that I I would or I like? It's like, no, well, you're not showing enough remorse, right? It becomes very relative, and it's really tough to kind of like draw those boundaries. It's like, okay, well, was this person sincere or not sincere? That's not my job. Like, I'm not there to figure out if this person's if they're sincere. I'm only concerned with what. Yes, in a way, for sure, right? The priority is always going to be me, right? That's for sure. There's no doubt about it. But even if this person has broken trust, or this person has hurt you, or this person has taken advantage in some way, I'm only concerned with the actions that that person shows afterward. Now, are those actions good enough for me, or they're not good enough for me? Yeah, that's fine, right? That's my personal call. I can be happy with this trajectory or her trajectory, or I can be unhappy with it, and I have every right to that. But at the end of the day, it's important to understand that my personal standard can't be imposed on others. Like, well, I wouldn't apologize like that. I would do it like this. Okay, that's good, right? We're all going to apologize in our own way. We're all going to show remorse in our own way. I think the bigger question, the number one question is always, okay, well, are you showing remorse? Right? That's the important thing. It might not be the way that I like it, and it might not be in the way that I express it. But I think that's number one. And then number two is like, okay, well, do I like the way that the remorse is being shown? Because a person might be like, yeah, yeah, sorry, right? And that's one way. Is it possible that that person's sincere? Possibly, right? Like we don't know. That's between him and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. And then at that point, I have a choice. I can accept the apology, or I can be like, you know what? No, I don't appreciate the way that you're apologizing. And I think a person who actually is sincere would say something like, okay, well, how would you like me to apologize? Right? And then at that point, when you open the door, that person can decide, because you've now opened the door for negotiation and said, well, okay, well, I want you to I want you to buy me like a Learjet, right? And you can ask, right? I don't see a harm in asking that. But the person who the apology is being requested from, he or she has the choice to what? To negotiate, or be like, yeah, I can't do that. Like, or I don't think that that's fair, because I chipped your car, right? Right, there's levels, right? There's levels to everything, and again, it's always going to be a case by case scenario and case by case situation, and not just that. As an outsider, we can be like, oh man, that's a big ask, right? If we're looking at a situation, we can be like, man, that's a big ask, but if the person agrees, is that a problem? No. As long as both parties agree, that's all that matters in those situations. Yeah. hmm well, let's look at his relationship. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was very close with Abu Talib, his uncle. He loved him. He spent a lot of time with him. He continued seeking tawbah for him after he died, and then Allah Subhanahu wa Taala revealed that you cannot make tawbah for the mushrikeen. So that shows the proximity and the relationship that he had. Did he have the same relationship with Abu Lahab? No, right? He didn't. Like he didn't have that close relationship, and you don't see him sallallahu alaihi wasallam walking into situations like if he knew Abu Lahab was going to be somewhere, you don't find him sallallahu alaihi wasallam voluntarily going to those places. Like there's an active avoidance that you can clearly see that was going on. Just like he would actively try to be in the company of Abu Talib, he would actively try to avoid the company of Abu Lahab, who and the relationship was the same, right? They're both his uncles. They're both his paternal uncles, um, but his attitude toward them and how he dealt with them it's actually very telling for us. And there are certain situations like Washi, right? So when Washi accepted Islam and he came to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ, he said to him, he's like, tell me how you killed my uncle. Tell me how you killed Hamza. So he said that, okay, well, he's like Hamza was actually jumping around a lot, and I was having trouble, taking aim. But he finally took a stand towards someone. He raised his sword. I threw my spear at him, and it hit him in his gut, and eventually he died. He said to him, he's like, listen, I can't even look at you. Yeah, every time I look at you, I'm reminded of my uncle. Uh, so he forgave him, but he also took a policy of active avoidance, and that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We're not obligated to interact with every single person who we see and who we deal with in our lives, and it's important to always to keep. So over there in that situation, that's something that like we would call in our modern terminology a trigger, right? Him Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam seeing Washi was what it was a trigger. It was triggering for him that it brought back like all of these memories, because Hamza was someone who, like, yes, Abu Talib, he helped him like with his wealth, he helped him politically, like he was offered his protection. Hamza, like he fought and protected the Prophet ﷺ, right? It's like it's a different level of relationship that he had. Again, his paternal uncle, very close with him, loved him, and then killed, like very early on, killed very early on, and it was something that was it was very traumatic for the Prophet ﷺ, and something that triggered him, and he dealt with it by he didn't say anything bad about Wahshi, right? Like he didn't curse him, like how could you, or no, he didn't say anything to him. He's like, listen, he's like, listen, every time I look at you, I remember my uncle, and he kind of left it on him. And Washi, from that point on, he actually avoided being like he was around the Prophet ﷺ, avoided being right immediately in front of him and within eyesight of him. So I think there are different ways to manage trauma. I think there are different ways to deal with it. But like I said, the first step of is this person deserving of it or not? It really depends on the response that we get, and that response has to be one of remorse. Again, how good or bad that is, I think that's more of a second stage, processing. But the first stage is like, okay, is this person showing remorse? Yes. Okay. Well, let's explore. This person isn't showing remorse. Okay, I'm not interested. I'm not interested either, because I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm again taken advantage of. Because many times individuals or people who have a tendency to fall into abuse or to take advantage, the problem is when we give such people leeway, what happens? Right, they're going to do it again, right? Because they they have a problem, right? They have a problem. Like if I have a problem with alcohol, what is the solution? To change my attraction to alcohol in my heart, right? It's hard, right? There are certain things that are directly connected to our hearts that it's very hard to just be like it's like our hearts aren't switches. I can't just be like, okay, alcohol, no more loving, right? Like it's like off. It's like, alhamdulillah, I'm good. Allah cured me. I'm good to go. And it's amazing, even in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, how did he deal with um, how did he deal with these attractions, or how did he deal with these issues? By keeping ourselves in situations that avoid us from falling into that. So if if an individual has a problem with zina, okay, well then he should probably spend more time with people who are positive, who are a positive influence on, who are good on, good with them. Same thing, like a person has a problem with drugs or alcohol, backbiting, right? Like these are all vices. These are all communal vices. It's very easy to fall into many of them, and if I want to avoid them, or if I don't want to fall into them, I can't just wrestle with my heart and cause myself to hate them. That's tough, right? That's a very tough thing to do. It's much more easier and much more practical to actually remove myself from situations where it's possible for me to fall into that. Make sense? Um, okay, alhamdulillah. So what's the last hadith we discussed? I think I just did the first one of the bab. Oh yes, okay. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى: قال حدثنا سعيد بن منصور وقتيبة بن سعيد ومحمد بن عبيد الغبري، واللفظ لسعيد قالوا حدثنا أبو عوانة عن قتادة عن زرارة بن أوفى عن أبي هريرة قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: إن الله تجاوز لأمتي ما حدثت به أنفسها ما لم يتكلموا أو يعملوا به. So over here, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overlooks what an individual says to himself as long as he does not state it or do it. Does that make sense? So over here, where does the accountability begin? Based on what? Huh? Right, so if I speak it, and what are some of the things that, so over here someone might be like, okay, well, what can you say? What are some of the things that you can say that you'll be held accountable for? Lying, right? They're very clear, right? Lying, backbiting, right? These are different things. Namima, tail carrying, right? These are all different things that a person can be held accountable for. I can think it, but I can't say it, right? I can't say it, I can't do it, or act on it. So here he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though speaking is a type of action, right? But he wants to be very clear that, listen, even the things that we say we're going to be held accountable for. And this goes back to a hadith of Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anh, where he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, we will be accountable even for the things that we say. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, there is not something that is worse except this, that the people will be thrown by their faces into the hellfire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. قال حدثني عمرو الناقد وزهير بن حرب قال حدثنا إسماعيل بن إبراهيم وتحويل الإسناد وحدثنا أبو بكر بن أبي شيبة قال حدثنا علي بن مسهر وعبده بن سليمان وتحويل الإسناد وحدثنا ابن المثنى وابن بشار قال حدثنا ابن أبي عدي كلهم عن سعيد بن أبي عروبة عن قتادة عن زرارة. So over here, you from the previous hadith, you have all of these different chains meeting at these bottleneck points. And the reason that the muhaddithin used to do this is because they look for corroboration in reports, making sure everybody's reporting the same thing. So over here you have about three different chains, all of them saying Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, قال قال رسول الله that the Messenger of Allah said, إن الله عز وجل تجاوز لأمتي عما حدثت به أنفسها ما لم تعمل أو تكلم به. So over here the only thing that changed is the order. So in the previous hadith it says the ones who speak, if you speak or act, over here it's act or speak. The meaning is the same. Meaning is the same. So this is actually a good corroboration between the previous ahadith. So over here he says that in Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah the most high and most powerful, tajawaz li ummati, he overlooks for this ummah amma haddathat bi anfusaha, when they speak, whatever it is that they speak to themselves or they say to themselves, ma lam ta'mal aw takallam bih, as long as they do not act or speak it. قال وحدثني زهير بن حرب قال حدثنا وكيع قال حدثنا مسعر وهشام تحويل الإسناد وحدثني إسحاق بن منصور قال أخبرنا الحسين بن علي عن زائدة عن شيبان جميعا عن قتادة بهذا الإسناد مثله. So again, more corroborating reports, more corroborating chains to show strength to the previous hadith. قال حدثنا أبو بكر بن أبي شيبة وزهير بن حرب وإسحاق بن إبراهيم واللفظ لأبي بكر قال إسحاق قال أخبرنا سفيان قال الآخران حدثنا ابن عيينة عن أبي الزناد عن الأعرج عن أبي هريرة قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الله عز وجل. So over here we have the hadith of Abu Huraira where he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إذا هم عبدي بسيء فلا تكتبوها عليه فإن عملها فاكتبوها سيئة. So he says here that if my slave or my servant thinks of a bad deed, فَلَا تَكْتُبُوهَا, then do not record it. Don't write it down. فَإِنْ عَمِلَهَا فَاكْتُبُوهَا سَيِّئَةً. But if he does it, then write down one bad deed. وَإِذَا هَمَّ بِحَسَنَةٍ فَلَمْ يَعْمَلْهَا فَاكْتُبُوهَا حَسَنَةً. And he says, and if he thinks of doing a good deed, then write it down as a single good deed. فَإِنْ عَمِلَهَا فَاكْتُبُوهَا عَشْرًا. And if he does it, then write down 10. So this shows that the means of acquiring sin are are more difficult and more challenging than acquiring good deeds. Like just thinking of something good is enough for acquiring a good deed. And this very much goes in line with a lot of even the discussion we were having, that yeah, having good thoughts about others, just having good thoughts in general, right? Just being a positive person. There's another hadith, inshallah, that we'll take, that's in Muslim, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Yadkhul al-jannata aqwaman afidatuhum ka'afidat at-tuyur." He said that there will be a group of people that enter paradise that their hearts are as light as birds. And and what brings that lightness, right? Like this person doesn't have any hatred, right? They don't have any rancor, they don't have any malice, they don't have any jealousy, right? And the only way to be that is to actually be a content, happy person, to have good thoughts of others and to have good thoughts in general. So just imagine just thinking good things, like, man, I wish I could help this person, or I wish I could do this and contribute in this way. Like just those thoughts, just thoughts like that are a means of building on our scale. Let alone when we actually execute them and when we act on them. So if any of you have any like goals or like ideas on things that you want to do, or good deeds that you want to perform, start recording them yourself, and they, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will record them for you. قال حدثنا يحيى بن أيوب وقتيبة بن حجر ابن حجر قالوا حدثنا إسماعيل وهو ابن جعفر عن العلاء عن أبيه عن أبي هريرة عن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الله عز وجل إذا هم عبدي بحسنة ولم يعملها كتبتها له حسنة. So over here, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says that if my slave intends to do a good deed and he does it, and he does not do it, I write it as one good deed. فَإِنْ عَمِلَهَا كَتَبْتُهَا لَهَا عَشْرَ حَسَنَاتٍ إِلَى 700 ضِعْفٍ. So over here he says that, but if he does do it, then I record it as 10 up to 700 times multiplied. وَإِذَا هَمَّ بِسَيِّئَةٍ وَلَمْ يَعْمَلْهَا لَمْ أَكْتُبْهَا عَلَيْهِ. He says, and then if he intends or if he thinks of doing something bad, then I do not record it against him. فَإِنْ عَمِلَهَا كَتَبْتُهَا سَيِّئَةً وَاحِدَةً. And if he does it, then I record it as one bad deed. قال وحدثنا محمد بن رافع قال حدثنا عبد الرزاق قال أخبرنا معمر عن حمام بن منبه قال هذا ما حدثنا أبو هريرة عن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فذكر أحاديث منها قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So over here, Hammam ibn Munabbih, who is a very famous narrator on Abu Huraira, he says that from the hadith that I have recorded on Abu Huraira, this is from those hadith. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الله عز وجل, Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, إذا تحدث عبدي بأن يعمل حسنة فأنا أكتبها له حسنة. That if one of my slaves intends on doing a good deed, then I record it as a good deed. ما لم يعمل, as long as he does not do it. فإذا عملها فأنا أكتبها بعشر أمثالها. And when he does it, I record it as a 10 times multiplied. وإذا تحدث بأن يعمل سيئة فأنا أغفرها له ما لم يعملها. And that if he does not, if he has like this internal conversation, or if he intends on doing a bad deed, then I overlook it and I forgive it as long as he does not do it. Okay, but over here, when he says I forgive it, this is very different than not recording it, right? Because if he says that he forgives it, what does that mean? That you did a bad deed, right? So when he is saying that if he forgives something, that means you have to do a bad deed to forgive it. فَإِذَا عَمِلَهَا فَأَنَا أَكْتُبَهَا لَهُ بِمِثْلِهَا. And he says that if he does it, then I record it accordingly. And we had said that, again, there are different types of deeds that are recorded, and we had spoken about this last time in a lot of detail. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قالت الملائكة ربي ذاك عبدي يريد أن يعمل سيئا وهو أبصر به فقال ارقبوه. So over here, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says so these ahadith, like there are three ahadith, These are all from the hadith of Hammam ibn Munabbih. So we said that he's one of the most famous narrators on Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. So these three hadith are narrated from him with the same chain, with the same isnad. He says, قال الملائكة, so the angels say, رب ذاك عبدي يريد أن يعمل سيئة. He says that this slave of yours, he wants to do a bad deed. And they say, وهو أبصر به, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows and he can already see what the slave intends. فقال ارقبوا. He says, so he Azza wa Jal, he said, follow him. Right? Just follow him, wait. فإن عملها فاكتبوها له بمثلها. And he says, if he does it, then if he actually performs this bad deed, then write what he is deserving of. وإن تركها فاكتبوها له حسنة. And if he leaves it, then record it as a good deed. إنما ترك من جراء. So he says that only record it as a good deed if he does it with the intention of pleasing me. So what does this hadith add for us? Yeah, there's additional information here, right? That we didn't have before, that we didn't take in the previous hadith. I'm sorry? What concerning? Okay. And this is the first time we have the hadith in the series of hadith that talk about getting a reward for what? Leaving a bad deed, or leaving bad thoughts, or leaving a bad intention. And here Allah Azza wa Jal, he puts, what is the condition that he puts? For his sake, right? So if you do it in my sake, then it will be recorded. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم said, إذا أحسن أحدكم إسلامه فكل حسنة يعملها تكتب بعشر أمثالها إلى 700 ضعف. So over here, the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم said that if one of you perfects his Islam, then every hasana, every good deed that he does, then it will be written from 10 to 700 times, and it will be recorded from 10 to 700 times. وكل سيئة يعملها تكتب بمثلها حتى يلقى الله. And then every bad deed he does will be written accordingly until he meets Allah Azza wa Jal. And we had talked about this before. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it says that if one of you perfects his Islam, what does that mean? He says that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and these are previous hadith that we took, right? The one who enters Islam perfectly, and the one who enters it poorly. What do we call that? We call that nifaq, right? So, meaning that they never truly entered Islam. So when he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the one who enters Islam perfectly is the one who actually embraced it and the one who actually believes it. A similar hadith. So over here he's saying that as long as you enter Islam, as long as you become Muslim, every good deed you do will be rewarded and multiplied. قال حدثنا شيبان ابن فروخ قال حدثنا عبد الوارث عن الجعد أبي عثمان قال حدثنا أبو رجاء العطاردي عن ابن عباس عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما يروي عن ربه عز وجل قال. So over here, there's another hadith Qudsi where the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, he says about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إن الله كتب الحسنات والسيئات, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has recorded both good deeds and bad deeds. ثم بين ذلك, and then he sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he explained what that means and how those deeds were recorded. فمن هم بحسنة فلم يعملها كتبها الله عنده حسنة كاملة وإن هم بها فعملها كتبها الله عز وجل عنده 10 حسنات إلى 700 ضعف إلى أضعاف كثيرة. So over here is a little bit it's a little bit different in the wording, but basically he عز وجل he says the Prophet ﷺ explains that whoever does a good deed and does not do it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala records for him one good deed, like one complete good deed. And if he intends to do a good deed and he fulfills it, he actually does it, then is recorded from 10 to 700 times إلى أضعاف كثيرة, or even more than that. وإن هم بسيء فلم يعملها كتبه الله عنده حسنة كاملة, that if an individual does intends a bad deed and does not do it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala records for him a good deed. وإن هم بها فعملها, and if he intends to do it and he fulfills it, كتب الله سيئة واحدة, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala records for him one bad deed. قال وحدثنا يحيى بن يحيى قال أخبرنا جعفر بن سليمان عن الجعد أبي عثمان في ذلك الإسناد بمعنى حديث عبد الوارث وزاد ومحاها الله ولا يهلك على الله إلا هالك. So over here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, here we have a similar hadith except the end of it, that وَمَحَاهَ اللَّهُ, that Allah Azza wa Jal, when it comes to the one who does who intends a bad deed, that Allah Azza wa Jal, he does not he erases it. وَلَا يَحْلِكُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا هَالِكَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not destroy except that which deserves to be destroyed. قال حدثني زهير بن حرب قال حدثنا جرير عن سهيل عن أبيه عن أبي هريرة قال جاء ناس من أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى النبي. So over here Abu Huraira, he records and he narrates to us that a group of people came to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So there were a bunch of companions. They went to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. فسألوه, and they asked him, إن نجد في أنفسنا ما يتعاظم أحدنا أن يتكلم به, that we find in ourselves, or sometimes we feel things or we think things that we're scared to say. قال وقد وجدتموه, he's like, is it actually like that? Do you actually feel like that sometimes? Like there's something so great that you're scared to say it? قالوا نعم, they said yes. قال ذاك صريح الإيمان, he said that this is pure iman, or this is faith manifest. I want to do a couple more hadith, similar meanings. قال وحدثنا محمد بن بشار قال حدثنا ابن أبي عدي عن شعبة وتحويل الإسناد وحدثني محمد بن عمرو بن جبل ابن أبي رواد وأبو بكر ابن إسحاق قال حدثنا أبو الجواب عن عمار بن رزيق كلاهما عن الأعمش عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بهذا الحديث. Again, he brings two more isnad to support the previous hadith. قال حدثنا يوسف بن يعقوب الصفار قال حدثني علي بن عثام عن سعير ابن الخمس عن مغيرة عن إبراهيم عن علقمة عن عبد الله قال سئل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الوسوسة. The Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم was asked about وسوسة. قال تلك محض الإيمان, that this is clear faith. So all these are hadith about waswasa, these things about like these I would say these evil thoughts that they have. The Prophet ﷺ, he responds to them and he says that's pure faith, that's iman. How? Why? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the fact that they recognize something is wrong, right? The fact that they recognize something wrong is very telling. That's good. Excellent. What else? Yes. Hmm. Okay, mashallah. Excellent. So the shaitan, he will come to, he knows that he cannot misguide you. So what is he going to do? He's going to whisper, right? Tayyib. Good. Excellent. What else? Okay, good. They didn't act on it. Again, it goes back to the recognition. Hmm. So is it normal to sometimes have a crisis of faith based on what we're taking here? Yes. Is it normal to want to question certain things? Yeah. And what's interesting is there's a series of a hadith, and we'll take the hadith on how do you deal with waswasa, right? Because this is a big subject. It's a big subject, and there's a whole bunch of a hadith that Imam Muslim brings that are very similar in their in the idea that he wants to talk about and what he wants to discuss. So what is the proper way to deal with waswasa, spiritual waswasa that we're talking about, right? We're not talking about OCD or other mental health issues, but we're talking about actual spiritual waswasa and having a crisis of faith. Okay, good. Seeking answers. I think that's great. That's exactly what they're doing, right? So they went to the messenger. Well, actually, the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked them, right? And it's interesting how this hadith, it follows what, how they dealt with the ayah, right? So you have this problem that they're having, and what immediately what do? They have it. It's a crisis of faith, right? They're like, oh my God, we have to do something now that we're not able to do. So it's a nice transition, right? It's a nice transition now into this idea of having a crisis of faith. Like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, this is too much. This is too demanding. And here, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says like, okay, well you have this waswasa and you have these thoughts. Well, that's actually iman. So what does this tell us about? Why is that important? This idea of questioning. Yes. Oh, excellent. Right. That's exactly what it is. Questioning only strengthens our faith. Why? Okay. Seeking knowledge. Good. Okay. Will every single thing have an answer? No, not necessarily. Um, and there are a lot of questions that are like that. But when we do have an answer, it actually brings it right. It actually strengthens it. And why does it strengthen it? Yeah. It goes. This goes a little bit back to the Tazkiyah class. So the removal of ignorance, what happens? Like with us as human beings, why is it so important that we know? Okay, all right. You get when you know something, it makes you feel like you have control, right? When there's information that you get the sense of control, it and you get this confidence, and you have active choices at that point. So over here, the beautiful thing about Deen is that if a Deen is right, it will always have, and well, not a question. It'll always have an answer. And there are things like I've experienced in my life. It's not necessary that I individually have those answers, right? But I can always find an answer in the religion itself, and that's what gives me confidence. And you can you look for answers in other places as well? You can. Will you always find them? Not necessarily. You might find an answer for like this question, and you might find an answer for that question, but this fundamental question, I'm not getting an answer for that. And we call those holes, right? Every time there's a hole, or every time I can't find an answer, what does that do to that religion or that ideology? I'm sorry? Right? Something else will definitely try to fill it, and it shows me the weakness in that belief system. So how do I reinforce my belief, just like you guys said, through questions? And that is the importance of waswasa and how we engage them. If there's some if I keep getting a whisper about something, and subhanallah, this has actually been my personal experience. When people call and they're like, Sheikh, I'm having a crisis of faith, or I'm having problems with this, or I'm having problems with that, I'd be like, okay, well, let's engage. What is it that you're having a problem with? Well, I'm having a problem with this idea, like Islam's treatment of women. And I'm like, okay, well, what parts of the treatment are you having a problem with, or what problems are what issues are you having? It's like, well, I have a problem with the inheritance. It's like, okay, well, do you believe that there are separate roles in Muslim society between women and men? Yes, I do. Okay. If we understand that there are separate roles and there are separate responsibilities, and responsibilities have to be distributed accordingly. Okay. And in this type of this type of engagement, when I can come and rationalize something, it becomes a lot easier. A question I had recently for Juma was the hudud laws, the capital punishment laws are very barbaric, and I have trouble coming to terms with that. So usually for this person, I usually ask, I was like, okay, well, what is barbaric? Like, how do it's very important to frame certain things, like what is barbaric? is taking the life of another for a crime, is that fundamentally flawed or is that fundamentally wrong? And I might be able to have that conversation because alhamdulillah, like nobody in my immediate family has been killed or taken advantage of or raped, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all our families. Okay, well, can you have the same confidence to someone who might have experienced that, in telling that person that, like, no, this person deserves to live, or someone who's killed multiple people, like, the mass shooters, is that justified? Is that okay? You know, should there be consequences? Jazakallah khair. And if we understand that there are consequences, okay, well, these consequences that we're placing, these are divine consequences. Every other consequence that you're presenting, these are always going to be created by human beings. And to what extent do we entertain waswasa, right? Is everything deserving of being questioned? No, not necessarily. And what happens is Imam Muslim, he actually brings a series of a hadith to discuss that and talk about that. So I'm going to go through a few of them inshallah. So I think we have about 4 minutes. قال حدثنا هارون بن المعروف ومحمد بن عباد ولفظ لهارون قال حدثنا سفيان عن هشام عن أبيه عن أبي هريرة قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يزال الناس يتساءلون حتى يقال هذا خلق الله الخلق فمن خلق الله فمن وجد من ذلك شيئا فليقل آمنت بالله. So over here the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the people will continue asking, they'll continue asking until they come to a point that, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that created everything, right? They reach that point. He says after that they'll take an additional step and they'll say, okay, who created Allah? فَمَنْ وَجَدَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ شَيْءٍ فَلْيَقُلْ. So whoever gets to that point of questioning, he should say آمنت بالله, that I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm asked, so that's what I wanted to ask. Why did the Prophet why did he give this answer? Because there are certain things that there are no answers for. In philosophy, we call this infinite regress. I don't know if you guys are familiar. What does infinite regress mean? It means that you're just going to keep, right, you're going to keep looping back. And if you keep looping, what's going to happen? You're just going to, you're never going to get to a solution. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's also answering this in a way, be like, okay, even if you believe in this idea of like, okay, this was created and then this came, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by him saying, say amantu billah, what is he implicitly saying and how is he answering the philosophers? That everything has a beginning, right? This is essentially this is answer. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's answering this in two ways. He's answering this in a way saying that, okay, listen, there's some questions where you're never going to get the answer to that. There's no reason. You're just going to keep spiraling, and this is very easy to spiral. The second answer that he's giving, he's like, listen, even if you ask this question, okay, well, there has to be a point where all of this began, because if we say, okay, there's Allah, and then there's a being that created Allah, well, guess what just happened? This is the being that's actually right. This is actually Allah. Because it's not possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was created, because He Azza wa Jal is the creator. So this is and Allah does best. I believe that this is why He sallallahu alaihi wasallam answered it in this way. قال وحدثنا محمود بن غيلان قال حدثنا أبو نضر قال حدثنا أبو سعيد المؤدب عن هشام بن عروة بهذا الإسناد أن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يأتي الشيطان أحدكم فيقول من خلق السماء. So he said that the shaitan will come to one of you and say that who created the sky or the heavens. من خلق الأرض, who created the earth. فيقول Allah. So he will answer Allah. ثم ذكر بمثله, and then he narrates in line with the previous hadith. وزاد ورسله, and he says that who he will say Allah Azza wa Jal, and then he added that ورسله. What's going on here? Oh, amantu billah wa rasuli. That's what happened. So he said that it's similar to the previous hadith, except the Prophet ﷺ, he answered them saying that say amantu billah wa rasuli, that I believe in Allah and His messengers. قال حدثني زهير بن حرب وعبد بن حميد جميعا عن يعقوب قال زهير قال حدثنا يعقوب بن إبراهيم قال حدثنا ابن أخي ابن شهاب عن عمه قال أخبرني عروة بن الزبير أن أبو هريرة قال الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم يأتي الشيطان أحدكم فيقول من خلق كذا وكذا حتى يقول له من خلق ربك فإذا بلغ ذلك فليستعذ بالله ولينتهي. So he says that the shaitan will come to one of you and say, who created this and that, to the point where he finally asks and he says, Man khalaqa rabbak, that who is the one who created your Lord? He said, if you reach this point, فَلْيَسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ, then seek refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلْيَنْتَهِ, and stop. Yani stop questioning, stop asking. قال وحدثني عبد الملك بن شعيب بن الليث قال حدثني أبي عن جدي قال حدثني عقيل بن خالد قال ابن شهاب قال أخبرني عروة بن الزبير أن أبو هريرة قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يأتي العبد الشيطان فيقول من خلق كذا وكذا بمثل حديث ابن أخي الزهري. So over here, the similar hadith, he says that the shaitan will come to an abd and he will say to him, من خلق, يعني who created such and such, يعني similar to the previous hadith. قال حدثنا عبد الوارث بن عبد الصمد قال حدثني أبي عن جدي عن أيوب عن محمد بن سيرين عن أبي هريرة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يزال الناس يسألونكم عن العلم. So he said that there will come a people who will continue asking about different types of knowledge حتى يقولوا هذا الله خلقنا, that it is Allah Azza wa Jal who created us. فمن خلق Allah, so who created Allah? قال وهو آخذ بيد الرجل فقال, he said, and then one of the narrators, he took the hand of another, فقال صدق الله ورسوله, he says that Allah and his messenger have spoken truthfully. قد سألني اثنان وهذا الثالث, he says that I was two people asked me about this hadith and this is the third. أو قال سألني واحد وهذا الثاني, or he said that one asked me and this is the second time I was asked. خلاص, we'll stop here inshallah. Any questions? Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, everything, like even if we look at this hadith and how the Prophet ﷺ answered it, it's very clear. Everything has an answer, right? Everything has an answer. Sometimes the answer is like, if I said, okay, well, why is Isha 4 rakat and why is Maghrib 3? Right? Sometimes there's no clear wisdom behind certain things, and we have to take. That's where faith will play a role, right? Because there has to be an element of faith. Because why doesn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just give us like 100% proof and 100% science? Why not? Right, that's not believing. Right, there's no belief at that point. There has to be a gap, right? There has to be a gap that is filled with faith. But if 95% of the religion makes sense, then it's important for us to trust that remaining 5, and that is what faith is. Inshallah, the Tazkiyah class will be after Salat al-Isha, so I'll see some of you there. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin, nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.